Before Elarion had a name. 1. The blade in the firelight. The rain stopped just before sunset, leaving the road black and shining between the pines. By the time the travellers found a shelf of dry ground above the flooded ditch, no one had patience left to argue about whether it was a good campsite. Gilstad checked it anyway. He walked the perimeter with the solemn care of a priest blessing a graveyard and the light-footed suspicion of a thief expecting the graveyard to answer back. He tested the stones, inspected the low branches, and prodded the dark hollow beneath a fallen cedar before pronouncing that nothing larger than a fox had recently attempted to murder anyone there. Selma had already made herself comfortable. "If the fox is handsome," she said, stretching her boots toward the new fire, "I am prepared to negotiate." Gilstad returned to the packs. "You say that about everything with a pulse. That is completely untrue. Some of my standards concern posture." The ease of the exchange belonged to people who had adopted one another as family without bothering to ask permission. Selma had claimed Gilstad as a younger brother at the festival in Seacomber shortly after discovering that he had no family to object. Gilstad had never formally accepted the arrangement. He had merely begun checking her campsites, counting her rations, and making certain she did not negotiate with handsome foxes. Elarion sat a little apart from them upon a flat stone. Her black cloak lay open over dark armour, and her wet hair hung loose to dry. She held a narrow blade across both palms. Her companions had travelled with her long enough to know how she fought. They knew the swift reach of her rapier, the precision of her bow, and the unsettling blue-white light that sometimes gathered around her hand before she struck. They knew she could translate an inscription while other people were still deciding which way up it went. They knew that an elegant manner and an apparent disregard for sensible caution existed within her in almost equal measure. They knew considerably less about where she had learned any of it. Elarion had never lied about herself. She had simply answered questions with such exactness that no answer ever wandered into another. Now she appeared unaware of the camp around her. She turned the blade a fraction, waited, and turned it again. At first glance, it was a dagger of uncommon age and ordinary appearance. Its metal was a deep iron grey. The guard was narrow, the grip dark with use, and no jewel or heraldic emblem announced that anyone important had ever carried it. Time had softened the edges of its plain leather sheath. A second glance offered little more. Only someone who understood both weapons and spellcraft was likely to persist to a third. Then, the apparent simplicity began to resolve into intention. The blade narrowed according to a balance too exact to be accidental. Shallow channels near the guard followed the natural placement of fingers forming arcane signs. What looked like wear along the fuller became interlocking runes when the light found them at precisely the correct angle. Its beauty was not hidden by enchantment. It was hidden by the knowledge required to see it. Elarion shifted it toward the fire. Copper light travelled halfway down the metal and disappeared. Selma watched her do this 3 times. "Do you expect it to answer?" she finally asked. Elarion did not look up. "I expect that I have not yet learned how to question it properly." "How long have you been questioning it?" "Years." Gilstad settled on the opposite side of the fire. "It looks like a dagger." "That is the first conclusion it encourages." He held out one hand. Elarion considered him before passing the weapon across the flames. Gilstad tested its weight without touching the edge. His expression changed almost imperceptibly when he felt the balance. He turned it once, found none of the runes and returned it hilt first. "A very well-made dagger," he amended. "Progress," Elarion said. Selma leaned closer. Is it magical? Perhaps. No examination has proved that it is. No examination has satisfied me that it is not. What does it do? I do not know. Who made it? I do not know. What do the runes say? I do not know. Selma smiled. This is an unusually unsuccessful interrogation. It has been considerably less successful for me, Elarion replied. I have been conducting it longer. Gilstad nodded toward the weapon. Why carry it if it has given you nothing? Elarindra's thumb stopped just short of the first rune. It gave me a direction. The answer altered the quality of the silence around the fire. Selma's teasing expression softened. Where did you find it? For an instant, Elarion looked ready to give one of her precise answers. In a ruin, perhaps, or beneath a watchtower. Both would be true. Neither would explain why her face had changed. The fire cracked. Sparks rose through the branches and vanished among the wet stars. Elarion followed them with her eyes and remembered another evening, another line of fire, and the smell of ancient dust on an ivory dress that had never been intended for climbing. Her hand closed around the dagger. You need not tell us, Selma said. That, more than another question might have done, made Elarion look at her. Gilstad had lowered his gaze to the coals. The others around the camp were arranging blankets and cups with studied inattention, leaving her an easy path back to safer subjects. Elarion discovered that she did not wish to take it. I found it, she said, when I was young enough to believe that a warning was merely a challenge written by someone with insufficient confidence in me. Gilstad looked up again. How young was that? The belief has proved persistent. Selma drew her blanket around her shoulders. Now I need the story. Elarion lowered her gaze to the old blade, and the road and rain receded from her thoughts. Very well, she said. But the first version is not a romance. They rarely know that at the beginning, Selma replied. Elarion looked past the fire into a room only she could see. When she began, she did not speak of the child she had been as though that girl belonged to history. 2. The chamber below the watchtower. When I was a child, I believed the whole of Elarion existed for the purpose of my exploration. The veil encouraged me in this misunderstanding. Its inhabited terraces descended from our restored manor through orchards, gardens, practice courts, and narrow paths that slipped between silver-barked trees. Water came down from the mountains in cold ribbons. Old walls emerged from moss without warning. Half-buried stairs climbed toward buildings that no longer stood. Beyond the outer paths, watchtowers and waystones remained from ages when the veil had guarded dangers its present inhabitants were still learning to name. I had been told which places were safe. I regarded this as useful information about where the unexplored places began. On the morning I found the blade, I was expected in the East Gallery for instruction concerning the obligations of noble correspondence. I arrived in ivory silk embroidered with small golden leaves, sat with exemplary posture, and produced 3 excellent observations about the opening form of a diplomatic letter. Then I noticed rainwater drying on the boots of the steward who brought my tutor a message. The mud was red. The western paths were the only part of Elarion with red earth, and they had been closed since the previous night's storm. I waited until my tutor turned to select another scroll. Then I left through the garden door with such quiet grace that it might have been mistaken for obedience viewed from the wrong direction. By midday I had crossed the lower orchard, climbed the boundary wall where roots had loosened the stones, and reached the ruined western watchtower. The storm had torn an old cedar from the slope. Its roots had lifted a slab of fitted stone, revealing steps descending into darkness. A temporary marker stood across them. Entry forbidden, until the foundation is declared sound, it read in my father's formal hand. Beneath it, in my mother's sharper script, someone had added, "This includes you, Elarion." The specificity gave me pause. It did not give me a great deal of pause. I lit a small globe of wizard light, gathered my skirt above the mud, and descended. The stairs ended in a passage barely wider than my shoulders. Water ticked somewhere beyond the walls. Roots had entered through the ceiling and spread pale fingers over carvings worn nearly smooth. Several showed elves holding blades. Others showed the same figures with their empty hands raised before them, lines radiating from their palms. I had studied sword forms with my father and the first principles of magic with Aunt Virissa. Until that moment, the lessons had occupied neighbouring rooms in my mind. The carvings placed them in the same motion. I followed. The passage opened into a round chamber beneath the watchtower. Broken practice frames leaned against the wall. Thin grooves crossed the floor in interlocking circles. On the far side, a relief depicted a company of warriors standing beneath an open hand and a broken sun. Their names had been cut from the stone so violently that chisel marks remained. The room had been searched before. Cabinets stood open and empty. Weapon racks had collapsed. Nothing of value seemed to have survived. I walked the circumference anyway. Behind a fallen practice shield, wrapped in the remains of a leather baldric, I found the dagger. It did not glow when I touched it. No forgotten voice entered my thoughts. The air did not grow warmer, and the wizard light did not change colour. The weapon simply fit my hand. I noticed the balance first, then the channels near the guard. When I turned it toward my floating light, the first of the runes emerged from the grey metal. Recognition moved through me without explanation. Someone had made this for a hand expected to pass from a sword grip into the shaping of a spell and back again. The weapon did not treat those acts as separate arts. Its maker had assumed they belonged together. I forgot the rain, the warning marker, and the diplomatic letter waiting unfinished in the East Gallery. I also forgot that old chambers sometimes objected to being disturbed. The stone beneath the empty baldric settled with a soft click. My wizard light went out. The entrance closed behind me. Lines in the floor awakened one after another, not with radiance, but with a faint blue reflection, as if moonlight moved beneath the stone. One of the broken practice frames lifted itself upright. Its wooden arms swung a blunted iron bar across the chamber. I ducked. The bar passed over my head and struck sparks from the wall. "A training mechanism," I whispered, because naming a danger made it feel more educational. The second sweep came lower. I jumped it, landed badly in my court shoes, and tore the hem of my dress. A second frame began to move near the sealed entrance. The chamber was not attacking at random. The reliefs around the wall repeated a sequence: guard, turn, open hand. Guard, turn, open hand. My father had taught me that a weapon's line revealed where its wielder must stand. Virissa had taught me that a simple spell required less power when placed where the world already wished to move. I raised the dagger against the next descending bar. I did not attempt to stop it. I turned its force aside, stepped through the opening, and pressed my free hand against the blue line exposed beneath the wooden arm. The smallest spark I knew leapt from my fingers. The mechanism froze. Across the room, a stone latch released. For the first time in my life, swordcraft and magic had answered the same problem. I stood in the darkness with my heart pounding and understood. with the unreasonable certainty available only to the young that I had discovered the shape of my future. Then my mother's voice came through the newly opened passage. "Elarindra." It was not loud. That was considerably worse. My mother entered first, bow in hand, and rain darkening her grey-blue cloak. My father came behind her with a drawn rapier and the expression of a man who had spent the last hour imagining every possible disaster in careful sequence. Aunt Virissa followed both of them, her dark robes held above the mud and scholarly interest already defeating any attempt at alarm. My mother looked at the moving frames, the sealed door, my torn dress, and the dagger in my hand. "Are you injured?" she asked. "No, Mother." "Then I may proceed directly to being furious." My father sheathed his rapier only after checking the chamber twice. "There was a barrier across the stair." "Yes, Father." "It stated that entry was forbidden." "Yes, Father." "Your mother added your name." I considered the remains of my argument and found them inadequate. That did make the intended audience unusually clear. From beside the relief, Virissa said, "Her interpretation is indefensible, but her grammatical analysis is sound." My father turned to his sister. "You are not assisting. I am establishing an accurate record of the hearing." My mother held out her hand. I surrendered the dagger. Her anger changed when she felt its balance. My father noticed. He examined the weapon next, tracing the channels without touching the runes. Virissa required no invitation. She produced a lens from somewhere within her sleeve and spent several silent minutes turning the blade beneath her light. "Well?" my father asked. "It is old," Virissa said. My mother gave her a level look. "You requested accuracy, not novelty. The runes are neither a language nor a spell notation I recognize. The grip and channels suggest a weapon made for one of the old spellblade disciplines. Possibly an order of eldritch knights. Possibly the order that used this chamber. That is probability, not proof." I looked from the carvings to the dagger. They used magic and blades together. "Apparently," Virissa replied. "Can you teach me?" "Eventually." "No," my parents said together. Virissa considered them. "The word eventually appears to have escaped your notice." The repercussions of my expedition were serious enough to be remembered and mild enough to improve in later retellings. I was confined to the inhabited terraces for a 10-day. I copied every warning I had ignored in 3 languages and composed the diplomatic apology my tutor claimed I had been studying. I then guided the wardens back through the passage and accounted for each decision I had made, including several that sounded less defensible when spoken aloud. The dagger remained with Virissa for examination. No curse appeared, no active enchantment answered Virissa's spells. The runes resisted translation. Neither Lighthaven nor Narim records contained its likeness. Even the age of the metal proved difficult to determine. When the blade was finally returned, my father laid it on the table between us but kept one hand across the sheath. "Before I give this back to you, you must understand why finding it does not excuse the way you found it." I ignored the warning. "You ignored a warning written specifically for you, entered an unstable ruin alone, and awakened a mechanism you did not understand." "Yes, Father." "Curiosity may reveal a path," he said. "It does not make you ready to walk it. Swordsmanship and magic rest on the same foundations: patience, judgment, and control." Mother emphasized judgment. I had intended to emphasize patience. From the doorway, my mother said, "Judgment." My father's mouth moved at one corner. Your mother is annoyingly persuasive. And still within hearing, she added. As I said, persuasive. Only then did he push the dagger toward me. If you choose this path, he continued, you will not study half of swordsmanship and half of magic. You will owe yourself the whole of both. I closed my fingers around the worn grip. Then I will learn both. That was the answer of a child who heard the challenge and not the warning. A little life has passed between that table and this fire, and I understand him better now. Talent may reveal a path, but it does not spare you from learning how to walk it. Choosing blade and magic did not divide what I owed each of them, it doubled it. The dagger did not answer. It never has. But from that day forward, it lay beside my spell books in Varissa's tower and beside my practice weapons in my father's court. It became the question connecting two passions I had previously believed I must pursue apart. Years later, when I formally committed myself to the path of an eldritch knight, I still could not read its runes. I carried it anyway, I still do. 3. 2 colours in the fire. Rainwater struck the campfire and hissed. The round chamber beneath the watchtower vanished, and Ellarindra found herself once again among wet pines and listening companions. Selma was smiling. You climbed into forbidden ruins wearing embroidered silk. It was what I happened to be wearing. That makes it considerably better. Gilstad regarded Ellarindra with a new expression. You had tutors, wardens, a practice court, and diplomatic correspondence lessons. Yes, we knew you were nobly raised, Selma said, but I had imagined something less organised. My childhood was very well organised. I frequently escaped the organisation. Were your parents rulers? Gilstad asked. Stewards, Ellarindra corrected. Elarion is a protected holding under Evereska, not an independent realm. Selma waved one hand. A beautiful mountain domain with a noble family, a manor, wardens, towers, and laws. A legally distinct form of government. A small kingdom. No. A very small kingdom. Ellarindra gave her a look of cool severity. It would have ended the argument in several courts. Selma only leaned nearer. The fire had dried the outer strands of Ellarindra's hair. In the rain and grey afternoon it had appeared almost black. Now copper moved beneath the dark auburn brown in slender threads, and muted gold rested along several edges where the flames touched them. Selma's expression changed from mischief to discovery. That was not there this morning. Ellarindra knew what she meant. It was. No. This morning you were all moonlight and disapproval. Now you are becoming a sunset. Gilstad glanced at Ellarindra's hair. It is brown. Thank you, Gilstad, Ellarindra said. Brown hair may still possess a romantic history, Selma insisted. Which parent gave it to you? The answer came easily. Both. Selma waited. When Ellarindra offered nothing further, she made an impatient turning motion with one hand. That is not a story. It answered your question exactly. It answered efficiently. Efficiency is the natural enemy of romance. And of warm dinners, Gilstad said. Let her eat. He did not look away, however. Ellarindra had travelled with him long enough to recognise interest concealed as practicality. Selma pointed toward the dagger. Your father taught you the blade. Your aunt taught you magic. What did your mother teach you? The bow, the mountains, how to hear weather approaching before the clouds admitted it. And which of them gave you the moonlight? Elarindra lowered the dagger to her lap. "My mother is Lirith of House Narim," she said, "a moon elf and once warden of the Silver Path. My father is Erendil Lighthaven, a sun elf and the former heir of his house." Gilstad frowned slightly. "Lighthaven is a sun elf line." "One of the older ones." "And they are both in Elarion?" Selma asked. The present tense warmed something in Elarindra that she had not known was cold. "My mother still oversees the western paths when she can persuade the younger wardens to tolerate her assistance. My father still teaches in the practice court and insists his students arrive before dawn. Aunt Verissa still claims to be a recluse from a tower close enough to appear whenever dinner is served." "You have never told us any of this," Selma said. Elarindra looked at the fire. "You have never asked." It was not entirely fair. They had asked where she came from. She had said Elarion. They had asked whether that was near Evereska. She had said near enough. She had not intended to deceive them. She had simply discovered that the longer she travelled beyond the veil, the more difficult it became to explain home without first explaining the choices that had created it. There was another truth beneath that one. Among strangers, the name Lighthaven could produce deference, resentment, expectation, or an interest in old elven politics. Elarindra had wanted companions who knew what she did before they decided who her ancestors required her to be. Now they knew some of what she did. They had trusted her beside danger. Selma had offered her silence when she could have demanded a story. Gilstad had returned the dagger without pretending to understand it. For the first time since leaving Elarion, Elarindra felt no need to protect her history from the people sitting beside her. Selma considered the two family names. A moon elf warden and the heir of an old sun elf house. Was that unusual? The formal histories call it unprecedented. And the informal histories? Use shorter words. Gilstad fed a branch into the fire. How did they meet? Elarindra's thumb found the worn grip of the rune-etched dagger. Behind her companions, she could almost see a room above the terraces, summer lamps glowing against the windows. Her mother sat at the edge of a green-covered bed. Her father lingered in the doorway, prepared to object whenever the historical record suffered. Varissa's shadow occasionally crossed the corridor with a book already open to the relevant correction. The memory did not feel like a tomb. It felt like a road leading home. The childhood she had just described belonged to her. The mud, the fear, the torn silk, and the unreasonable certainty. What came next had been inherited, polished by her mother's repetitions and her father's objections until even the pauses felt familiar. When Elarindra spoke again, her words carried a cadence unlike her ordinary conversation. It was not affected. It was remembered. "Before Elarion had a name," she said, "there was a door beneath the mountain which no hand, living or dead, was ever meant to open." Gilstad frowned. "Someone opened it." "Naturally. Your father." Elarindra paused. "That," she said, "is where my mother's version traditionally becomes less precise." Selma pulled her blanket close and grinned. "Now we have reached the romance. 4. The Swordsman and the Arrow. In the years before the Vale was restored, the eastern passes of Evereska were guarded more by memory than by walls. Old roads crossed the mountains beneath moss and fallen stone. Some led to watchtowers abandoned after wars no living human could name. Others ended at cliffs where bridges had once hung. A few went to places the elves remembered well enough not to visit. The Vale that would become Elarion was one of those places. House Lighthaven remembered it differently. The Lighthavens were sun elves of old name and older confidence. Their galleries held swords carried beneath vanished banners, and their archivists could recite the family line until a listener began to suspect Corellon himself had once requested their advice. They spoke of the ruined vale as an ancestral holding unjustly surrendered to time. Somewhere beneath its mountain, their histories said, waited the Dawn Archive, a treasury of lost spells, treaties, and memories. At its centre lay the heart of mourning, an heirloom said to prove House Lighthaven's right to guide those who had forgotten the proper elven path. Lord Thalor Lighthaven intended to recover it. His son and declared heir, Arundel, was given command of the expedition. "Was he handsome?" Selma asked. Elarindra's carefully composed expression did not move. "My father. At the time." He was 112 years old, an accomplished swordsman, fluent in 7 languages and entrusted with the lives of 14 retainers. That was not my question. Elarindra allowed the remembered cadence to loosen. My mother says he was intolerably handsome. My father says that description remains irrelevant to the historical record. Your mother is right. Continue. Arundel Lighthaven travelled in white, gold and polished steel. He wore no crown, although Liraith's bedtime version occasionally supplied him one whenever she thought he had become too pleased with his own account. At his left hip hung Dawn Answer, the narrow ancestral sword of his house. Its golden guard was shaped like the first rays of sunrise, and its pommel carried the seal required to open the Dawn Archive. He came into the high country expecting hardship and found rain, broken roads, and a silver-fletched arrow buried in the tree beside his head. "One step farther," called a woman's voice from the rocks above him, "and the next will be less courteous." Arundel raised one gloved hand, halting his company. He did not reach for his sword. The archer stood 30 feet above the road upon a ledge scarcely wide enough for both her boots. Her cloak was the grey-blue of a cloud before snow. Dark hair had been braided away from her face, and a recurved bow rested in her hands with the ease of something grown there. 4 more archers were hidden badly enough for Arundel to find them, and well enough that no one else in his company did. "I am Arundel of House Lighthaven," he said. "I know who you are," the archer replied. "Then you also know that threatening the appointed representative of my house is a questionable beginning to diplomacy." "It was not intended as diplomacy. It was intended to stop you." She descended without using the path. Arundel watched her find holes in wet stone that he would not have trusted dry. When she reached the road, she pulled the arrow from the tree, inspected its point, and returned it to her quiver. "Liraith Narim," she said. "Warden of the Silver Path. The road beyond this marker is sealed." House Narim was a moon elf lineage, old but never much impressed by age alone. Its wardens kept hidden trails, watched the mountain boundaries, and guided those whom Evereska permitted to approach. To the Lighthavens, the Narim were useful, honourable, and regrettably informal. To the Narim, the Lighthavens were learned, brave, and inclined to mistake inheritance for wisdom. Arundel produced a scroll bearing the authority of the High Council and the countersign of 3 noble houses. Liraith read it twice. "This grants you leave to survey the old holding," she said. "It does," Arundel agreed. "It does not grant leave to open the mountain." "It grants leave to recover property belonging to House Lighthaven." Liraith rolled the scroll closed. "If it lies behind that door, it ceased belonging to anyone when our ancestors sealed it." "You have seen the door?" "Yes." "Then you can guide us to it." "No." It was, Elarindra's mother still maintains, the first occasion on which Arundel looked at Lireth not as an obstruction but as a problem worthy of study. It was, her father insists, the first occasion on which Lirith smiled at him. Did she? Selma asked. My mother denies it. Which means she did. That is not a recognized principle of evidence. It is in courtship. Gilstad poked the fire with a stick. If she refused, how did he find the door? Elarindra glanced at him. He followed the map carried by his house, and she followed him. To prevent a disaster. Of course, Gilstad said. You have both become unusually cynical about my mother's motives. We have met you, he replied. The others around the fire laughed. Elarindra waited with dignified patience until they finished. Then she returned to the mountains. Lirith did follow Arundel. She told herself it was because the Lighthaven map had been copied before the western stair collapsed and would lead the expedition across a shelf of rotten stone. This proved correct. She told herself it was because snow was coming and Arendel's company had packed silk tents more suitable for a garden campaign. This also proved correct. She did not tell herself that the young sun elf had accepted an arrow beside his face without threatening her people, or that he had listened when she described the mountain as if it were more than terrain. For 3 days they climbed together. Lirith taught the expedition to hear hollow snow beneath a crust and to cross a slope without waking it. Arundel reorganized the company so that its slowest scholar was never left behind. When a rope bridge tore loose, he crossed the failing span to carry an injured Narim warden back over his shoulder. When ice spiders came down from a cleft at dusk, Lirith put 3 arrows through 3 pale bodies before the first reached the camp. Arundel killed the 4th with a single movement of dawn answer. Neither thanked the other for long enough that the omission became embarrassing. On the 4th evening, they camped beneath an overhang while snow closed the pass behind them. Arundel found Lirith repairing a split arrow by firelight. Your warning saved 6 lives today, he said. Lirith kept winding the binding thread. 7, your archivist would have followed the mule. Then 7. Arundel sat across from her, careful not to crowd the narrow shelter. I was wrong about the western shelf. She looked up, plainly surprised. Do sun elves usually survive admitting that? The best of us become stronger. The others become members of councils. That time she did smile. Around the later campfire, Selma put a hand over her heart. There. That is the moment. The moment of what? Elarindra asked. She began falling in love. She began revising her opinion of him. For intelligent people, that is often the same thing. Elarindra opened her mouth, considered the statement, and continued without answering. The climb forced Arundel and Lirith to discover one another in increments too practical to dismiss. He learned that her silences were not empty. She used them to listen to wind, stone, and people who revealed more when not interrupted. She learned that his formality did not prevent kindness. It merely required kindness to arrive properly dressed. On the 5th day, Arundel gave his dry gloves to the youngest Narim warden and pretended he had misplaced them. On the 6th, Lirith altered the route to pass a sheltered spring and pretended the change was necessary for the mules. By the 7th day, each had accumulated enough evidence to distrust the judgment of their respective families. They reached the ravine before dawn. 5. The door beneath the mountain. Black stone rose on either side of the ravine like 2 hands pressed together. Snow lay untouched between them. At the far end stood a door so perfectly fitted into the mountain that it first appeared to be part of the cliff. No hinges showed, no seam disturbed its surface except a circle at the centre within which a sunburst had been carved deeply enough to gather snow in its rays. The pommel of Dawn Answer matched the hollow at its heart. A second ring of writing surrounded the sunburst. These runes were not Lighthaven work. Nareem wardens had cut them after the door was sealed, using a dialect older than the one Lirith spoke but not beyond her understanding. Let the light within remain without witness. Let no blood claim what blood created. Lirith read the warning aloud. The chief Lighthaven archivist, Salir, stepped nearer. He was a narrow-faced sun-elf whose reverence for the past had rarely required him to question which version of it served his house. The first line might also be rendered, "Let the light within remain beyond the unworthy," Salir said. The second could mean, "Let no false blood claim what true blood created." Lirith turned toward him. It could mean that only if one replaced 3 words. The dialect is archaic. The verb is remain. The noun is witness. Neither is obscure. Sailor's mouth tightened. You are a trail warden, not an archivist. And you are translating your desire rather than the stone. The disagreement passed through the expedition like a drawn blade. Lighthaven retainers gathered behind Salir. The Nareem wardens moved closer to Lirith. Arundel stood between them, looking at both rings of writing. He had spent his youth beneath portraits of the elves who built this place. He knew the family account, House Lighthaven as defender, teacher, and guardian of elven achievement. The Dawn Archive was not merely a collection. Its recovery, his father believed, would restore the house to influence it had slowly lost. Arundel had been taught that recovering it was his duty. Lirith brushed snow from the outer ring. Someone sealed this from outside, she said, not to keep thieves from entering, to keep something from leaving. Salir rested one hand near the scroll case at his belt. Or to keep an inheritance from being taken by those for whom it was not intended. Arundel looked at Lirith. If we turn back, will your wardens permit a properly constituted inquiry? Yes, she said, with scholars chosen by both houses, and by neither. That could require years. The door has waited thousands. Snow sifted into the ravine. The sun had not yet reached the stone, but the golden guard of Dawn Answer seemed to hold a pale light of its own. Arundel drew the sword. Beside the campfire, Gilstad exhaled through his nose. So it was your father. Yes, Elarion said. Your mother's imprecision has been corrected. My father carried lawful authority. Remaining in the ravine exposed both parties to worsening weather, and the best available Lighthaven records indicated that the archive would recognize his blood. Gilstad studied her. That sounds rehearsed. It is my father's preferred explanation. And yours? Elarion looked into the fire. She remembered Arendel's hands wrapped around a practice rapier, pale burned scars crossing both palms. She remembered asking about them as a child and receiving an answer that had been careful without being false. He was proud, she said. He was also afraid of returning home without the thing everyone had taught him would prove his worth. And he was wrong. The rain hissed softly in the coals. Elarion returned to the ravine. Arundel placed Dawn Answer's pommel into the centre of the sunburst. The stone answered his blood and the sword together. Light filled the carved rays, first red, then amber, then a white so pure it cast no shadow. The mountain gave a long, deep sigh. A seam appeared beneath the warning runes and widened as the door withdrew into the cliff. Warm air breathed from the darkness beyond. It smelled of dust, metal, and flowers left too long in a sealed room. Lyrith knocked an arrow. "Do not enter!" Sailor passed Erendil before he could answer. The archivist crossed a shallow antechamber and descended 3 steps into a long gallery. 6 Lighthaven soldiers followed him out of habit. Erendil swore and went after them. Lyrith entered at his shoulder with 3 wardens behind her. The remaining members of both expeditions stayed in the ravine where they could hold the entrance and tend the injured. They would later say the door began closing before anyone inside touched a second thing. Erendil turned as stone descended behind the last Narim warden. "Outside!" he ordered. They did not reach it in time. The outer door settled into place, leaving 12 elves within the mountain. Erendil and Lyrith, Sailor, 6 Lighthaven soldiers, and 3 Narim wardens. No one mistook their position. They were not entering an archive now. They were trapped inside it. Lyrith gave Erendil a look that required no translation. "You may explain after we find another exit," he said. "I am deciding which explanation you deserve." Their light revealed the gallery in stages. Slender pillars descended through the mountain in 2 rows. Between them hung tall golden mirrors, each turned toward a distant point of colour. Alcoves contained tablets of translucent stone, cylinders wound with silver writing, and glass vessels in which small scenes repeated without sound. Hands signing a treaty, mages demonstrating a spell, soldiers kneeling before a crowned figure. The Lighthaven histories had not lied about everything. The place truly was an archive. It held memories, oaths, spells, genealogies, and decisions preserved by methods their descendants no longer understood. What the histories had omitted was why all those records faced the same direction. At the far end of the gallery, beyond a second arch, floated a crystal no larger than 2 joined fists. Fire moved inside it with the slow rhythm of a sleeping heart. 9 rings of gold and crystal turned around it, though no current of air stirred. Sailor laughed with wonder. The heart of morning. Lyrith was not looking at the crystal. She had found a smaller carving upon the second arch, an open hand beneath a broken sun. Several names had once been cut below it. Everyone had been struck away. Elarindra stopped speaking. Across the campfire, Gilstad waited before asking, "The same mark that was in your chamber?" "Yes." "You knew that when you found the dagger?" Elarindra looked down at the ancient blade in her lap. "It was not until I was much older that I understood the significance of the chamber," she said. "As a child, I thought it had been only a forgotten training room. Later, Aunt Verissa and I compared its carvings with fragments recovered from Narim records and with my father's account of this gallery." Selma glanced at the dagger. "It belonged to the people who made that mark." "Perhaps," Elarindra replied. "The chamber was used by an order of eldritch knights who turned against the Heart's makers. They served as scouts, ward breakers, and messengers during the first effort to seal it. Their formal name was removed from every record we have found. My aunt calls them the Unnamed Company because even scholars eventually tire of describing a thing they cannot name." "And the dagger was theirs," Gilstad said. "The dagger was found in their chamber," Elarindra corrected. "That is evidence of location, not ownership. It bears no mark from the wall and none of the names that were erased. I believe there is a connection. I cannot prove it." Gilstad accepted the distinction with a small nod. Selma looked toward the fire. "Why did they turn against the Heart?" Elarindra's expression became still again. That is what my parents were about to discover. Within the mountain, Salia approached the first mirror. Its gold surface reflected him as he wished to be remembered, robed in light, bearing the recovered knowledge of his house before a grateful council. "Do not touch it," Erendil said. Salia lifted his hand. "It recognizes us." "That is not the same as welcoming us," Lyrith warned. The archivist's fingertips met the glass. The crystal at the end of the gallery opened its eye. Every mirror turned. The light struck Salia first. It did not burn him. He became still, his face raised in bliss while golden lines spread beneath his skin. 6 beams followed, each finding one of the Lighthaven soldiers who had entered behind him. Their weapons lowered. Then, as one, they turned toward the Moon Elves. The sealed door remained behind Erendil and Lyrith. The awakened heart waited ahead. Between them stood 7 living companions whose faces had been emptied of everything but judgment. Salia spoke, but the voice came from every mirror. "Air," it said to Erendil. "Bring order to those who refuse it. 6. The light without shadow." Elarindra's childhood version of the battle contained 12 golden guardians, a bridge over a river of fire, and a winged lion made entirely of glass. Selma raised one finger. "Before you continue, was there a lion?" "No," Elarindra said. "Your mother invented a winged glass lion. She said young listeners require a recognizable threat." Gilstad gestured toward the fire. "And the golden guardians." Elarindra's amusement faded. "My mother transformed the enthralled soldiers into constructs when she told the story to a child. It was easier than explaining that my father and mother had been forced to fight people they were trying to save." 7 were taken, Gilstad said, counting back through the account. "Sayalir and 6 soldiers," Elarindra confirmed. 5 remained free. My parents and 3 Nharim wardens. The rest of both expeditions were outside the sealed door. "No guardians, then," Selma said reluctantly. 7, if one insists upon my mother's terminology. No lion. "A serious deficiency." The actual danger was sufficient. Elarindra settled the dagger across her knees and returned to the shadowless gallery. The first enthralled sword came down at Lyrith's head. Erendil caught it on Dawn Answer. The blow drove him to one knee. "Do not kill them!" he shouted. Lyrith loosed an arrow past his shoulder. Its broad head struck the attacker's wrist and sent the sword spinning. That was already my intention. The 3 Nharim wardens spread between the pillars. They used blunted arrows, hooked shafts, and the narrow spaces between mirrors to keep the enthralled soldiers from surrounding them. Every act of restraint cost them. The heart felt no similar obligation. Sailor raised both hands. A mirror cast a bar of white light across the floor. Where it passed, shadows disappeared and muscles locked. One warden fell rigid beside a pillar. Another dragged her clear before a descending blade could reach her. Erendil turned aside a spear and struck its wielder with Dawn Answer's pommel. Golden lines brightened beneath the soldier's skin, as though the heart felt the blow through him. "It is using the mirrors to carry its commands," Lyrith called. "Then we break the mirrors," one of her wardens answered. His arrow struck the nearest glass. Instead of shattering, the surface came alive. An ancient scene filled it. Sun elf mages stood in a circular chamber around the heart of morning. Before them knelt moon elves, wood elves, and elves of mixed houses. Light connected every bowed head to the crystal. A Lighthaven lord raised one hand, and 100 mouths spoke the same oath. Another mirror awakened, then another. The entire gallery became a corridor through the true history of the place. The Dawn Archive had begun as a repository of shared elven memory. Its builders had discovered that an oath preserved in the mirrors could be shown with perfect clarity. Later they learned that clarity could become insistence. Insistence became compulsion. During an age of division, one faction of Sun Elf houses decided peace would be easier if every branch of elven kind accepted the guidance of those most qualified to rule. They defined most qualified as most like themselves. The Heart of Mourning became the lens through which recorded authority could be forced into a living mind. It did not merely preserve laws, it made disobedience impossible. Not every Lighthaven accepted what had been built. Some joined Narim Wardens, independent mages, and the Eldritch Knights whose names were later erased. Together they defeated the Heart's first masters and sealed the complex. In the generations that followed, guilt became secrecy. Secrecy became uncertainty. Uncertainty became a more flattering legend about a stolen inheritance waiting to be reclaimed. At the campfire, Gilstad's face had gone hard. It was a weapon of obedience. Only now, after Elarindra had shown him what it did the phrase belong to him. "Yes," she said. "My father's family remembered an archive because an archive can be inherited. They forgot the weapon because a weapon requires someone to answer for it." Selma looked at the dark road beyond the fire. "And your father walked inside carrying its key." "He did? Did he know?" "No. He knew there were gaps in the histories. He believed the gaps concealed an injustice done to his house." Elarindra paused. "He has never used his ignorance to excuse his choice." The fire settled. She saw Erindil's scarred hands again, older than in the story and steady around a cup of tea. Then the memory released her. In the gallery, the Heart spoke through Sailor and the 6 enthralled soldiers. "Air," it called, "take your place." Erindil parried a spear and turned its point into the floor. "I already have one." Lyreth shot the spear from the soldier's hand. "Less conversation!" The sealed outer door offered no escape. Their only hope lay ahead, at the source of the commands. They fought down the avenue, one pillar at a time. Lyreth and her wardens tangled legs, pinned sleeves to wood, and used the mirror frames as barriers. Erindil placed himself wherever the line threatened to break. Dawn Answer moved in disciplined arcs, never cutting flesh when a flat strike or locked blade would serve. Still, the Heart drove its captives forward without regard for broken fingers, dislocated shoulders, or blood. By the time the 5 free elves reached the central arch, one warden could no longer stand. Another had an arrow wound from a shaft the Heart had torn out of the floor and returned. They remained in the avenue to hold back the enthralled while Erindil, Lyrith, and the last warden entered the central chamber. The Heart floated within 9 rotating rings of gold and crystal. Each ring bore fragments of commands in a different elven hand. Dawn Answer hummed in Erindil's grip. He understood then that the sword was not merely a key to the outer door. Its pommel seal and sunburst guard formed part of the governing instrument. The heir carrying it was never meant to discover the Heart. He was meant to command it. "Can you close it?" Lyrith asked. Erindil watched the turning rings. "Perhaps." "That means no." "It means I am thinking." Light struck the arch behind them. The last Nharim warden cried out and fell. Lyrith drew another arrow. "Think more quickly." Erindil stepped toward the Heart. The light received him like a returning sun. For one terrible moment, he saw what it offered. Every divided council made silent. Every old enemy made obedient. Evereska safe because no voice could dissent from the wisdom of those chosen to lead. House Lighthaven restored, his father's pride transformed into gratitude. Every uncertainty of the future made clean and orderly. The heart offered him vindication so complete that it almost resembled peace. Then he saw Lirith on her knees. Not wounded, not defeated, smiling up at him with no disagreement left in her eyes. That was the flaw at the center of the promise. The heart could imagine harmony only after it had removed the freedom to refuse. Arundel turned Dawnancer in both hands and drove it between the rotating rings. The machine screamed, light climbed the blade and wrapped his arms. The sword locked into place, pinning 3 rings together. Their separate revolutions aligned for a single instant, opening a narrow path to the crystal core. "Lirith!" Arundel shouted. She saw the shot. It was 40 paces through moving metal across a wind made of burning magic and directly past Arendel's shoulder. The opening would last no more than a heartbeat. At its center stood the sunburst guard of Dawnancer. "The sword will break," Lirith said. Arundel tightened both burned hands around the hilt. "Yes, it is the seal of your house." "At present," he said as the light reached his throat, "it is the seal on something considerably worse." Lirith drew the bowstring to her cheek. "If you move," she called, "I will kill you." He managed a strained smile. "You have not missed all week." She released. The arrow passed through the golden rays of the sword guard. Dawnancer shattered. The arrowhead continued through the heart of morning. For an instant, every surface in the mountain became transparent. Lirith saw snow falling outside. She saw tree roots gripping stone, underground rivers silver in the dark, and the bones of forgotten builders laid gently in sealed rooms. She saw the training chambers and hidden refugees of the Order whose names had been cut away. She saw Arundel suspended within a web of light, one hand reaching toward her. Then shadow returned to the world. The heart broke without sound. Sailor and the enthralled soldiers collapsed. The mirrors went dark. Deep beneath them, stone began to move. Arundel released the hilt of his ruined sword. "Now," he said, "we should run." The failure of the heart released the outer seal, but the avenue had begun collapsing between the survivors and the door. They carried the wounded through falling dust. Lirith and Arundel supported Sailor between them until 2 recovered soldiers could take his weight. A pillar broke across the gallery. One of the Nharim wardens found a maintenance stair behind a darkened mirror and led them above the obstruction. They reached the antechamber as the outer door began to rise. Hands from the waiting expedition seized the first wounded and pulled them into the ravine. Lirith emerged last with Arendel's arm across her shoulders. His hands were burned, her bow was cracked, and neither possessed enough dignity to pretend the other was not holding them upright. Behind them the door sank closed for the final time. The sunburst at its center split from top to bottom. Snow had stopped. Morning reached the ravine at last. The first true sunlight touched the broken seal as the last false light died beneath it. Selma leaned across the campfire. And then they kissed. "My mother's version places their first kiss there," Elarindra said. "I knew it. My father maintains that neither of them had sufficient feeling in their faces. Your father is damaging the story." Aunt Varissa claims they kissed beside the Western Waystone 3 weeks later. She continues to threaten them with a scrying record whenever they argue about it. Gilstad looked up sharply. "Does she have one?" "My aunt has never answered that question." 7. What they chose. Destroying the heart saved both expeditions. It did not make either family grateful. House Lighthaven mourned Dawn Answer more publicly than it acknowledged the lives preserved by its destruction. Lord Thaelor called his son home and received him in the Hall of First Light beneath the painted faces of their ancestors. Arundel stood before him with bandaged hands and no sword at his hip. Lyrith was not permitted inside. "You destroyed the proof of our inheritance," Thaelor said. "I destroyed an engine built to enslave our kin," Arundel replied. "According to a Narim warden. According to the inscriptions written in our own hand." Thaelor descended from the raised seat at the end of the hall. "You allowed yourself to be turned against your blood." Arundel looked up at the long line of golden portraits. For the first time he wondered how many had known the true purpose of the heart and how many had merely accepted the better story. "No," he said. "I finally learned what my blood had done." Lord Thaelor offered him a way back. Arundel would declare that the heart had been corrupted after its creation and that Liraith Narim had exceeded her authority. He would end all personal association with her. In return, the loss of Dawn Answer would be described as a noble sacrifice, and Arundel would retain his place as heir. "And if I refuse?" Arundel asked. "Then you refuse more than me," Thaelor said. "You refuse your house, your duty, and every generation that prepared a place for you." Arundel remembered the heart offering him a world without dissent. "A place prepared by others," he said, "is not always the place one should take." He removed the sun-shaped clasp from his cloak and placed it at his father's feet. Across Evereska, Lyrith faced the warden's circle. Her hearing took place outdoors because the Nharim trusted no roof above a difficult truth. Her mother sat among the senior wardens. Her father stood behind the circle and did not look at her. They accused Lyrith of failing the oath that had kept the door closed. This was true. They accused her of placing confidence in a Lighthaven heir over the judgment of her own line. This was also true, although not in the manner they meant it. The circle offered to restore her command if she swore never again to act under Arundel's influence. "He did not command me," Lyrith said. One of the elder wardens leaned upon her staff. "Then why defend him?" "Because he took responsibility when every lesson of his childhood taught him to protect his pride instead. Because when his inheritance became a weapon against us, he broke it. And because if our great oath leaves no room to recognize such a choice, then we have begun worshipping the door instead of what it guarded." The circle withdrew her command. When Arundel and Lyrith met that evening at the Western Waystone, neither yet knew what the other had surrendered. "I am no longer heir to House Lighthaven," Arundel told her. Lyrith held his gaze. "I am no longer warden of the Silver Path." "I am sorry." "So am I." They stood in silence while the mountain wind worried the grass around the stone. "What will you do?" Arundel asked. "Return to the Vale. Someone must make certain nothing survived beneath it." "Then I will go with you." Lyrith's expression tightened. "Your father will believe I stole you. Your family will believe I corrupted your judgment." "Did you?" "Frequently," Arundel said, "but not in the manner alleged." She laughed, and some of the grief left his face. "You should know," Lyrith said, "that the Vale has no intact house, no clear road, and one well that tastes of iron." "Then our first decisions are obvious." "Repair the roof and clear the road. Find a better well." According to Verissa Lighthaven, that was when they kissed. She claims to have arrived at the Waystone 1 minute later and found them behaving with insufficient concern for politics. Ah, Selma sighed beside the later fire. The aunt is reliable. My aunt is many things, Ellarindra said. Reliability depends upon the subject. Was she already reclusive? Gilstad asked. Not yet. At the time she was attempting to reform House Lighthaven by explaining its errors to it in exhaustive written detail. Her departure followed shortly afterward. Verissa was Arundel's elder sister, a mage whose devotion to truth was exceeded only by her inability to present it gently. Before the expedition, she had discovered missing pages in the Lighthaven histories and sent the first warning to the Narim wardens. Without her, Liraith would never have reached the mountain in time. When Verissa learned what the two families had done to Arundel and Liraith, she arrived in the ruined vale with 3 mules of books, 2 chests of spell components, 7 fruit tree saplings, and no intention of returning. I have been informed that I am a corrosive influence, she said. It seemed sensible to remove myself before the foundations of the house dissolved. Arundel looked at the laden mules. Did father give you those books? Certainly not. Did he know you were taking them? He knew I was leaving. Details encourage unnecessary attachment. Liraith liked her immediately. Romance did not repair the roof. It did not clear the fallen road, sweeten the well, restore the terraces, or persuade Winter to wait while 2 disinherited nobles decided what their principles required in practice. It did make the work worth sharing. Other survivors came first. 2 Narim wardens who had fought in the mountain brought their families. A Lighthaven soldier whose brother had been freed from the Heart's command arrived with mason's tools. Then came scholars who wished to record the buried mosaics, gardeners who saw what might grow on the southern slopes, and elves who had grown tired of being told that choosing one tradition required despising another. They rebuilt the watchtower before the manor. Liraith organised the mountain patrols. Arundel trained anyone willing to learn the blade, regardless of house or birth. Verissa renewed the outer wards and built herself a narrow tower at the edge of the trees, far enough from the settlement to preserve her reputation as a recluse and near enough to appear whenever dinner was served. Months after their arrival, Arundel and Liraith exchanged vows at the Western Waystone. They invited both families. Neither family officially attended. The survivors stood with them instead. Verissa served as witness, corrected the wording of the vows twice, and later denied crying despite testimony from everyone present. House Lighthaven called the marriage an abandonment of duty. The Warden's Circle called it a private choice without official consequence. Less formal voices in both families used language that required no archivist to translate. Arundel and Liraith married anyway. 8. The Vale with no name. In the first winter, the grain ran low. Near sunset one evening, a line of grey-cloaked figures appeared upon the pass. At their head walked Liraith's mother. She carried no bow. Behind her came Narim pack animals laden with flour, dried fruit, lamp oil, and seed. The Warden's Circle did not send us, she said. Liraith looked at the 20 wardens behind her. Of course not. The Circle is capable of being wrong without being capable of admitting it quickly. A common institutional talent, Verissa observed. The Narim stayed through the winter. In spring, several remained. House Lighthaven took longer. Lord Thaler would not speak his son's name in council. Yet messages reached Arundel through servants, cousins, and eventually his mother, Lady Saria, who possessed a quieter courage than her husband and had learned how much could be accomplished while appearing to arrange flowers. She came to the Vale 6 years after the door was opened. Saria brought no soldiers and wore no house colours. In her hands she carried a young apple tree wrapped in damp cloth. "Your sister tells me the southern wall still lacks shade," she said. Arundel embraced her before she could produce another excuse. The settlement grew around them. Its people needed a name for letters, maps, and the arguments of merchants. Vairissa proposed 6, each derived from an obscure historical language, and each rejected before she finished explaining it. Lirith suggested simply calling it the High Vale. Arundel pointed out that at least 9 places were already called the High Vale. An elderly mason settled the matter. "It is Elarion in the old trail speech," he said, "the place where contrary lights meet." The spelling changed in the first charter. The meaning remained. Elarion became a protected holding under Everesca rather than a sovereign realm. Arundel and Lirith were named its joint stewards, charged with guarding the eastern paths and the sealed ruins. Its charter welcomed every elven lineage willing to accept that service outweighed ancestry. In time, carefully and imperfectly, it welcomed trusted outsiders as well. The settlement did not end prejudice. No charter could accomplish that. It created a place in which old assumptions could be challenged without requiring anyone to surrender every beloved part of the culture that had formed them. Some visitors arrived expecting Arundel to preside over Lirith. They left after discovering that he deferred to her concerning the paths, and that she deferred to him concerning defences, while both deferred to Vairissa only when no other method would end an argument. Some Sun Elves declined invitations because they would not enter a holding governed jointly with a Moon Elf. Some Narim refused to serve beneath a name associated with Lighthaven. Others came, stayed, worked beside people they had been warned against, and revised their beliefs one shared winter at a time. "So your parents did not found a kingdom?" Selma said. "No," Elarindra replied. "They founded a beautiful mountain domain, governed it together, changed its laws, and married despite both families opposing them. They accepted a stewardship under Everesca. A small kingdom. A legally distinct form of government. A very small kingdom." Elarindra gave her the same look of moonlit severity she had used earlier. Copper still burned at the edges of her hair. "This," she said, "is why I generally tell the story to children." Gilstad had been quiet. Did the families accept the marriage after the settlement succeeded? Some individuals did. Institutions prefer to rename surrender as gradual reconsideration. That is not an answer. "Then no," Elarindra said, "not all at once. The Narim returned first. House Lighthaven took years even to speak of Elarion without calling it the Eastern difficulty. Reconciliation began. It did not finish." She said this without the bedtime cadence. The firelight dimmed, and for a moment her hair deepened toward black. Then someone shifted a log. The flames rose again. 9, the first child of Elarion. Years later, during the first warm rain of spring, a daughter was born in the restored house above the terraces. She had the refined features of both her parents, green eyes neither family had predicted, and hair so dark that Lady Saria Lighthaven declared it proof of an ancient Sun Elf ancestor. Lirith's mother waited until Saria left the room before observing that it was plainly Narim hair. In sunlight, it glimmered copper and muted gold. Beneath the moon, it deepened toward black and held a cool sheen along its curves. Both grandmothers privately claimed vindication. Her parents named her Elarindra Lighthaven of Elarion. "Lighthaven?" Gilstad interrupted. Your father kept the name after renouncing the house? He renounced his inheritance, not his history, Elarindra explained. My mother insisted upon the distinction. She says a better future cannot be built by pretending no one came from a flawed past. And House Lighthaven accepted you? Selma asked. Elarindra folded her hands around one knee. My grandmother did. Many cousins did. My grandfather sent a formal acknowledgement of my birth and addressed me as a daughter of House Lighthaven. He has never visited Elarion. Have you met him? Twice. The fire shifted. Gilstad did not ask whether either meeting had been kind. Selma, who could recognize a wound even when she declined to leave it untouched, asked more gently, But you were happy there? Elarindra's expression warmed. Entirely. The forbidden chamber beneath the watchtower had not been an exception to her childhood. It had merely been the occasion on which her curiosity acquired consequences large enough to enter the family record. Elarindra climbed orchard trees before the branches could reasonably support her. She learned the names of mountain flowers and then took them apart to discover whether the lessons had omitted anything. She attended court instruction in ivory silk embroidered with gold leaves and escaped afterward with grass stains on both knees. She could perform a formal introduction before she could be trusted not to investigate an unlocked cabinet. Her mother taught her the bow. Do not command the arrow, Lirith told her. Understand where it already wishes to go. Elarindra understood this to be poetry until her first arrow vanished into a hedge. Her father taught her the rapier. Speed is useful, Arundel said, after disarming her for the 9th time, but arriving first is not the same as arriving correctly. On the 10th attempt, she struck his sleeve. On the 11th, she attempted the same trick, was disarmed again, and accused him of revising the lesson after she had solved it. Virissa taught her magic, although Arundel maintains that his sister mostly taught Elarindra how to enter rooms that had been locked for excellent reasons. A lock is an argument, Virissa told her. It may be persuasive, it is never conclusive. This philosophy produced several incidents that remain sealed in the family record. The rune-etched dagger gave those separate studies a shared direction. Elarindra wanted to understand the hand for which it had been made. She practiced the transition from a fencing guard into the shaping of a spell until neither motion interrupted the other. She read every surviving reference to ancient eldritch orders. She copied the untranslatable runes until she could draw them from memory, then discovered that familiarity was not the same as understanding. The dagger yielded nothing. Her calling did. In the practice court, she became precise enough to justify some of her confidence. In Virissa's tower, she became learned enough to recognize how much remained unknown. Beyond both, waited a world filled with ruins, languages, spells, and dangers that no book in Elarion could contain. At night, when rain pressed softly against the windows, Liraith told her daughter the story of the swordsman and the archer. Young Elarindra lay beneath a green quilt, listening with the ferocious attention she would later give ancient manuscripts. Before Elarion had a name, her mother would begin, there was a door beneath the mountain which no hand, living or dead, was ever meant to open. From the doorway, Arundel would say, the phrase living or dead is unnecessarily alarming. It establishes consequence, Lirith would reply. It establishes nightmares. Did you open it? Young Elarindra would ask. Her father would consider retreat. Your father, Liraith would say solemnly, was highly educated. That does not answer the question. You see, Arundel would tell his wife, this version is already turning her against me. Virissa sometimes appeared in the corridor to correct dates, magical terminology, and the number of enthralled soldiers. No telling was ever precisely the same. Yet some passages never changed. The warning on the stone, the arrow through the sword, the choice at the western waystone, and the arrival in a vale without a roof or a name. When Ellarindra was old enough to read the adult records, the story changed again. She learned what the heart had done. She understood why her father sometimes stopped speaking when the tale reached the door. She recognized the open hand and broken sun from the chamber where she had found the dagger. Understanding the chamber did not solve the weapon. It made the questions surrounding it larger. Once, when Ellarindra was old enough to notice how visiting adults looked at her but too young to understand why, she asked which kind of elf she was. Lirith sat on the edge of the bed and combed her fingers through her daughter's dark hair. "You are not a border drawn between two countries," she said. "You are the place where both arrived and discovered the map was incomplete." "That is not a kind," young Ellarindra objected. "No," Arundel agreed from the doorway. "It is a very long answer. I am her mother. I am permitted one long answer each evening." He crossed the room and knelt beside them. "You are Ellarindra," he said. "That is the kind we have." The child found this satisfactory and demanded the part with the glass lion. 10. The shape truth takes. The campfire had burned low while Ellarindra spoke. The road beyond their small circle was invisible. Water fell from the pine needles one drop at a time, each striking the leaves below with the sound of a distant footstep. Selma had stopped smiling, although warmth remained in her face. "Your mother still tells that story?" she asked. "Whenever given sufficient encouragement," Ellarindra said, "and occasionally when given none. If we were in Elarion tonight, she would alter 3 details. My father would correct 5, and my aunt would arrive with documentary evidence." "Do they know you tell it?" "My mother expects me to improve it. My father expects me to improve his role in it." Gilstad sat with his arms around his knees. Firelight sharpened the angles of his human face. "Did the families ever truly reconcile?" Ellarindra considered the question as carefully as he had inspected their campsite. "The Narim returned first," she said. "House Lighthaven has recognized my father's stewardship and restored my aunt's access to its archives, although she refuses to live there again. My grandfather signed the final charter of Elarion. He has not apologized to either of my parents, and he still has not visited." "So no," Gilstad said. "So partly. Reconciliation is not a gate one walks through. It is a road people must continue repairing. Some stop, others take their tools and go farther." Gilstad nodded once. Selma looked from him to Ellarindra. "And how much of the story is true?" "The expedition existed," Ellarindra said. "The door was opened. The Heart of Morning was destroyed by an arrow fired through Dawn Answer. The hearings survive in both family archives. The original charter bears the names of my parents and the first settlers." "That is not what she asked," Gilstad said. Ellarindra's mouth curved in a small private smile. "No, it is how my mother tells it. Not the same thing." "No. But sometimes a story is the shape truth takes so that a child can carry it. Later, if she is fortunate, she grows strong enough to carry the parts that did not fit." Selma tilted her head. "Which parts did not fit?" Ellarindra looked toward the darkness beyond the camp. How frightened they were, how angry. The years in which neither family spoke their names. My father's guilt for opening the door, my mother's fear that one day he would regret choosing her. The fact that building Elarion did not end the old prejudice, it merely gave people somewhere to practice becoming better. That sounds like the beginning of another story, Selma said. My mother always says it is. A gust moved through the trees. The flames bent low, and Elarindra's hair became almost black. Then the fire lifted again, finding copper beneath the darkness and gold along its edges. Gilstad noticed this time. It does change, he said. Selma beamed at him. Her hair. The way the light finds it. Elarindra met his eyes. There was no mockery in his face. Yes, she said. I think it always has. Gilstad's attention moved to the rune-etched dagger. And did learning about the chamber help you understand that? The chamber, yes. The dagger, no. Nothing. Elarindra turned the blade toward the coals. The hidden runes appeared for a heartbeat and disappeared again. I know why the chamber existed, she said. I know why its occupants were erased from the histories. I still do not know who carried this blade, whether it belonged to that order, what its runes mean, or what it may yet be capable of doing. Selma watched the old steel. Does that not trouble you? Constantly. You sound pleased. Mysteries and I have a complicated understanding. One of the others placed another branch upon the coals. Sparks rose, bright against the wet night. Selma settled deeper into her blanket. Tomorrow evening, I want the version with the lion. There was no lion. Then tomorrow you may begin correcting your mother's one obvious mistake. The glass lion was an allegorical device. It was a winged glass lion, Selma said. It needs no defense. Gilstad lay down near the fire and pulled his cloak over one shoulder. Wake me when the fox arrives. Only if it has excellent posture, Selma replied. Their laughter moved softly into the trees. Elarindra remained awake a little longer. The dagger rested across her palms, unchanged and unresolved. She no longer expected one night's memories to persuade it to surrender secrets that had survived centuries. She thought instead of Elarion as it must be that evening. Her mother would have returned from the western paths. Her father would have completed the following morning's exercises and left them arranged with unnecessary precision. A lamp would be burning in Varissa's tower, whether her aunt admitted to expecting visitors or not. And you left all of that, Selma said quietly. Elarindra had thought she was settling to sleep. For a time. Why? Elarindra looked beyond the fire toward the road they would take in the morning. Because my parents built a home by choosing a world larger than the one they inherited, she said. They raised me to believe I should see it. Do they expect you back? Gilstad asked without uncovering his face. My mother expects letters. My father expects me to admit that I should have packed a second cloak. My aunt expects rubbings of every inscription I encounter and considers all other correspondence ornamental. That was not the question, he said. Elarindra smiled. Yes, they expect me back. The answer seemed to satisfy him. She watched the sparks vanish among the branches and remembered a room above the terraces, rain on the windows, and her mother's voice beginning again at the place where all beloved stories begin. Before the danger had a name, before the ending was known, when the door was still closed and every choice remained possible. Tomorrow the road would carry Elarindra farther from Elarion. It would not carry her away from home. The ancient blade still held its secrets. The wider world held others. For now, that was invitation enough.